How is everyone doing? About another big round of applause for Ben and Joe for putting on an incredible event. This is the 6th year. I didn't realize that they've been going for 6 years, which is absolutely insane. And I met one of my former business partners at the first ever event. So if you're here wanting to get started in the syndication space, this is the right place to be. You'll find great partners. We're going to talk today about how to streamline the construction costs in order to maximize your investor profits. For those people who are out there who are doing this, who is an active sponsor right now? Is anyone hands up and wanting to maximize their investor profits? So for those people who don't know who I am, I'm just trying to get this clicker working. Here we go. Yeah, for those people who don't know who my name is Reed Goossens. I'm doing a Q&A session afterwards in the lunchroom. As a thank you for everyone coming and participating today, I've got a free copy of my book. I've only got a handful of copies, but come by, ask a few questions, and I'll give you my copy of this book that I co-wrote with 6 other incredible Australians who've all made the pilgrimage across the ditch and started successful real estate companies here in the US. And my ugly mug is there. So again, a little bit about who I am. I moved to this country 10 years ago, which was crazy to think. And I moved here to be a structural engineer and just to be an expat. I also moved here to chase a girl, and fairy tales do exist, and I ended up marrying that girl, and she's an American, and as they say, you know, Aussies stealing all the American women. I bought my first property for $38,000, 6 months been fresh off the boat, and today I now have $650 million of assets under management. I've got a podcast called Investing in the US. I'm an author, recovering structural engineer. I'm the founder of RSN Property Group and formerly the co-founder of Wildhorn Capital. But most importantly, I'm a down-to-earth type of guy. I'd like to say I'm self-proclaimed as an all-round good bloke. Coming up and ask me any questions you want. I'm trying to be an open book because I was like you guys before, sitting in the crowd, wanting to be a syndicator, and I don't boast about my success to give me ego. I boast because I want to inspire people to go off and take action. I moved here with limited funds. I didn't know anyone when I first moved here. I didn't even have a job. And I came here and I started investing in real estate, and so can you. So taking mass amounts of action, hopefully you can take that away from today's conversation. So what we're going to cover on today's, there's a blank slide. Oh, this was the first property I ever bought, $38,000. I flipped a house in Philadelphia many, many years ago, and now I did a first syndication in 2015, and now I have over 3,200 units in the portfolio. And so today I'm going to cover the overall construction process that I use and implement in my business in order to maximize my investor profits. And I'm going to specifically talk about the way in which material costs have changed across the globe in this process and how that's affected me as a consumer and how that's going to affect me moving forward using this process to scale my portfolio across the country. And then we're going to summarize by giving you a little bit my sort of 2 to 3 tips of where I think certain costs are going in the construction space and how that impacts those investor profits as well. Disclaimer, anything that I talk about today is, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CPA. If you want to implement any of these strategies, I implore you to do so, but go off and get some advice before you take action. So, from a 30,000 foot level, my background is in structural engineering. When I first moved to this country, I went and worked for a real estate developer. And in that time, I learned some really incredible things about how the big boys do it. And one of the most important things that I learned was all about buying it in bulk. And it's not a complicated process, but I saw from soup to nuts in the ground-up construction process, everything from buying PVC piping to wood to the roofing materials, all the way through to taps and hardware inside the units at scale from ground-up construction with some of the big developers in Los Angeles. And I'm now applying that in my portfolio today. So what do? I take elements of what I learned in my former career and I apply it in my portfolio. So when I buy a deal, I look to measure twice and cut once. I look to buy things in bulk. I check with my suppliers here in the US and abroad, and then I get it shipped to my properties. And the reason I do that is obviously very simple: costs. I'm looking to reduce costs for my investors and for the project, because in a world where cap rates are compressing, we have a smaller margin between interest rates and cap rates. We have to be implementing processes where you can shave margins. And when you're shaving cents off a big bulk order, it makes the real massive impacts to the overall construction budget, which then saves costs for our investors, and I can give it back to them, you know, in different ways in terms of increasing the rents by still producing a really nice, clean, affordable, safe, good-looking type of renovation. So that's a 30,000 foot level. There's two things in order to do this process effectively that I have learnt, again, through my former career and bringing it into the multifamily space. And the first one is consistency of product. And I have actually implemented this process since my first ever deal. I bought my first deal as a lead syndicator in 2016, 192 units, and I was doing this exact process from day number one: bulk buying, reducing costs. Over time, I've realized that these two things that I'm talking about right now are the most key in making sure that I have enough product in order to make sure my GC is on time, make sure the schedule doesn't slip, and make sure that I'm not being impacted by global supply chains. And the first thing is, you know, as you can see here on the screen, these are actual pictures of what I buy. So I buy 2 types of faucets. I buy one type of sink for the kitchen. I buy a sink for the bathroom. I buy flooring and fans and light fixtures. Again, nothing special, but it is powerful when implemented correctly. And so the second thing, well, I'll go to the next slide, sorry. So this is what I would call a gold standard renovation. And for most people who are sitting out here who are operators, this doesn't look anything fancy. I'm sure a lot of your properties on renovations look exactly the same way. But a few things that I'll point out that you may not be aware of. So if I look at the granite countertops, one of the things that I want to learn about and understand when I'm looking at buying granite in bulk is what's the cost of the granite to install today versus having to have the operating expense of resurfacing a product over time. And in my analysis, it's actually not that much more expensive to install a hard surface top today in order to save me over 4 or 5 years worth of resurfacing costs in operating expenditure. So that's the first thing. The other thing you'll notice there is that when I buy granite from abroad, I also try and look at making sure that I am streamlining or reducing my costs in terms of labor, right? So I get it pre-cut in Asia because the Asian labor market is cheaper than it is here in the US. But one thing you might not look at that and say, well, I can't actually cut the sink out when in Asia because if I ship it across the US, across the world, that granite might crack. But if I cut it on site, I will reduce the cost of my labor because I'm getting a pre-cut in Asia. But you'll notice that the sink there, if I'm having to get it cut on site, then I need to implement a sink that will cover that interior surface because that interior surface needs to be polished. Polished costs more money. So again, implementing different small design tweaks in order to make sure that I'm streamlining the process. Now, I will call this a gold standard package. You'll see you've got granite, we've got the faucet, we've got the flooring, we've got the lighting, we've got the door hardware. I haven't replaced the cabinet boxes, and that would probably be the next level up in terms of a platinum package. And again, we'll talk about the costs of where costs have come from and where we're going. And next slide. And then so, again, very clean, affordable, looks great. Probably a lot of people do exactly the same things, but I'll talk about the costs and how you guys can reduce them by buying in bulk. We do everything from the toilet fixtures, the curved shower rods. We do the ceiling pucks. If you look there, you can see a ceiling light fixture that looks like a can light, but actually costs $11 a fixture, and it's an LED, and it emits a large amount of light that is a lot better than having those silly dangling living room lights that you walk around and as a tall person you might hit your head as you're touring properties. So that's the first thing. The first thing is consistency of product. The second thing, which is actually the really important thing, is maintaining supplies in my warehouse. It is very much a two-edged sword in terms of how much I can control the lead times, because lead times are really, really important in this industry. And I don't have the control of that being just a small consumer here in the United States. So I work very closely with my suppliers here in the US to make sure I have enough supply to last me for the next 6 to 12 months. However, I don't want to get too out over my skis and order too much product in case, for example, the other day I just ordered 80 units worth of granite. Now, 80 units worth of granite will take me 2 years to get through in terms of renovations. I need to ask myself, is this property going to be around in 2 years? Or can I get through 80 units? Or do I maybe only order 40 units worth of stuff in order to set me up for success and exit maybe a little bit sooner? So understanding where I am in terms of my supplies and how much I have here in the US can help me reduce my lead times, because ultimately that can affect the project in terms of schedule, in terms of giving the GC materials on time, and that's something that I have become astutely aware of in this COVID pandemic, that lead times can be really exacerbated due to the global supply chain. So some of the pros and cons we just mentioned about in doing this process is obviously reducing costs. That's the first one. Some of the cons of doing the bulk buying, the mass buying, is the fact that lead times do get affected quite quickly, and it's out of my control. So the example that I gave before of the granite, I can't order granite because it's pre-cut in Asia, I can't order it for 2 different sites, meaning if I have excess granite on one property, I can't use it on another property because it's been pre-cut for that asset. So again, going back to understanding how much I'm forecasting in terms of a renovation coming up in the next 6 to 12 months is one of the cons of doing what I do, rather than just saying, buying the slab and cutting it on site. But again, if I do that, I'm going to have to deal with US labor costs rather than, say, international labor costs in cheaper markets. But one thing we've all learned, become experts on, is the global supply chain issues. I'm sure all of you have been impacted since COVID, and it's really had a massive impact on everything from the Amazon orders that we get, Amazon shipping, Amazon Prime, I should say, everything through to my suppliers here in the US. And so before COVID, I didn't really understand the impacts of supply chain on my processes and on on the profits in terms of bringing my materials to site. But in the last 12 to 18 months, I've actually had to learn a lot more about supply chain in order to really understand how to reduce my costs. So everything from international labor costs, to manufacturing costs, to shipping costs, to global tariffs, everything to here in the US of shipping costs and labor costs, and that all impacts my bottom dollar. So with that being said, where have we come from? And this is data that I've collated with my supplier over the last 10 to 20 years. He was able to pull together data from how international labor costs have changed over the last 20 years. And as you can see here, I get my products from 2 places internationally, Taiwan and China. And over the last 20 years, we've seen a massive increase in international labor costs in those markets. And we've seen a 1,000% increase in China, for example. Now that is also due to the fact that a lot of people are coming out of poverty, or not poverty, but out into the working class, and the middle class is growing. And so people are demanding a higher wage. That is impacting me as a consumer. In Taiwan, when I go and get my certain products from Taiwan, I have a different labor market there. It's a more sophisticated labor market. Thus, I have to pay more to get those products made in those countries. But over time, we're seeing a very, very large increase in labor costs internationally. In terms of material costs, specific material costs, you can see that, and this data only goes back 10 years because that's all I could pull up with my supplier. But over the last 10 years, we've seen about a 50% increase in certain materials. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was a global tariffs, which I've seen part of that 50% increase in the vinyl flooring costs has actually been, 37% of that has been as a result of global tariffs, which has made a big impact on me as a consumer and how I bring my products to the US. A similar curve is seen here with granite, and we've had about a 30% increase just in global tariffs on the price of granite. Now, if I remove those global tariffs, I'll have something that is very, very reasonable in terms of inflationary costs on a product that is used a lot, like granite. And then similarly with lights and sinks, we've seen a big increase and a big impact with global tariffs. If I took those global tariffs away, my increases on materials would be more or less in line with inflation. If I look at then, say, something like a country that doesn't have global tariffs, like Taiwan, for example, I can see over the last 10 years, my cost in materials has increased roughly at the rate of inflation, about 2 to 3% a year, which is what we would expect in this type of market. But again, trying to illustrate the differences and the impacts of global tariffs on certain materials and how we, as a consumer, are going to have to pivot in the future if these things are if these global geopolitical issues are going to have to continue down the line. But one of the biggest things that I've seen in terms of a cost is getting my products here. So in COVID, we saw a 260% increase in shipping costs. Historically, before COVID, I would call up my supplier and I'd say, hey man, I need to get my products on site, and 3 months later, stuff would start turning up. And it would cost me around $4,000 to $6,000, depending if I'm getting a 20-foot container or compared if I'm getting a 40-foot container. Today, I've seen an over 300% increase in that cost. That same container of granite I was just talking about, it cost me $19,000 just in materials. In the shipping cost, it cost me $24,000 alone. So the biggest cost I've seen since the global pandemic is being in the shipping costs. And the reason is this. International shippers during COVID they operate on extremely fine margins. And for ships sitting in a port, it actually costs them more to maintain them than it does to actually maybe go and scrap them for metal. And we saw a lot of shipping companies take their ships offline and go scrap their boats. So if there's less boats on the water, what does that mean? It's a supply and demand issue. There's higher costs. So right now, we're seeing really, really, really high costs of shipping to get into the US, which has been a major problem. And I'll talk about what I think is going to happen in the future. In terms of labor costs here in the US, we've also seen, this is historical data from 1967. Guess what? Things are going up. Things are becoming more expensive, whether it be in rate of inflation, but we're seeing the highest labor costs here in the US that we've ever seen in history. We've had a little bit of dip after 2009, but I do believe those labor costs are here to stay in terms of increasing. So it goes back to those little design elements that we're doing on site to reduce the costs we have to spend here in the US and putting those costs more on the supplier on the international side in order to reduce those costs. So where we are today. So today I'm sort of buying faucets for about 60 to 70 bucks a unit, including shipping costs. Sinks are about 80 bucks a unit. You can see granite has increased to $8 to $9 a square foot. Fans, 75 bucks a unit. And then flooring's costing me around $1 a square foot without shipping costs on top of that. And if I look online, again, these were just two examples of items that I thought were very similar. You can see I'm still getting a major savings. And I'm sure you could find a sink cheaper than 445 bucks, but from a look perspective, it was roughly around the same type of look and feel. And so in terms of what I'm spending today in installation costs here in the US, I'll point your attention to the third column, shipping. Today, I'm spending just as much on shipping as I am on materials. That is having a massive impact on my total costs for installation here in the US. So granite will cost me about $1,200 today. That's both the bathroom and the kitchen. Flooring is going to cost me anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000 a unit. Now you might be thinking, that's not that great in terms of pricing, but you also got to remember what I was paying beforehand as a cost of, we have a 300% increase in shipping costs. That has drastically increased that particular row, column 3, and thus that has been the major impact of why we're backing into these costs today. So where we are in terms of overall picture, I'm paying, because I'm getting all the materials myself, I'm really negotiating directly with a GC for his labor costs, or his or her labor costs. And right now, I just got an invoice for 15 units, and the average cost per square foot was between $5 to $6.50 a square foot just for labor. That depends on the size of the unit. I'm spending about $900 to $1,200 a unit in raw materials. Everything besides maybe caulking and baseboards and paint is probably is not in that materials number. And then appliance sets are costing me anywhere between $1,700 to $1,800. So for this product right now, I'm spending about $7,800 for an average 750 square foot unit. Now, I will caveat by saying there's no cabinets involved in that. So if I was to add cabinets, it would probably be another $1,200 to $1,500, depending on the finish and the wood pricing at the time. I also, maybe glass backsplashes would be the only other thing that you might add here to bring it up to what is called a platinum standard. So with that being said, where we headed, right? What is my 2 cents overall for what's going to happen? Well, 3 things I think is the real big picture for me looking forward into 2022 and beyond. And the first one is the global tariffs. It is an issue. It's something I have to deal with. And we're seeing a lot of companies, particularly in China, shifting their operations to other countries like Vietnam, South Korea, and even Latin America. However, that takes time, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I'm keeping my eye closely on the types of suppliers that exist outside of China in order to not have to deal with those global tariffs. I do think we're going to see a lot more companies move to Latin America, but that, again, will take time. Operations of that scale will take probably 3 to 5 years to really get up and running, and then there's all the quality control issues that go along with it. The second thing is the global supply chain. I do think there'll be more ships, and I read an article the other day that there's been the biggest shipping starts in new construction in history to try and offset this issue of shipping costs. So again, this will take time, and I think we're going to see a drastic reduction in total shipping costs from what I'm paying $25,000 a landed here in the United States. I don't think we'll get down to as close to $4,000 or $5,000 as what we've historically seen, but I think we'll sort of end up around the $10,000 to $12,000 in terms of shipping costs. That will take time. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think into 2023 and beyond, you will see more ships on the ocean. Thus, you're going to see a reduction in that shipping costs. Thus, I'm going to be able to go back to reducing those overall costs of the granite install, the flooring install, quite significantly, probably 50% reduction in that shipping costs, as I was showing that table earlier. And then the final thing is labor costs. One of the stickiest things of inflation. I'm not an economist, and we have some incredible people here at Best Ever Conference talking about the effects of inflation. I think we're here to stay. And that graph that I showed earlier has been going up and towards the right for many, many years, and I think we're now at a new floor. So overall, it's not doom and gloom. If you're interested to learn more about my supply chain and how I've been able to go out and scale this across the US, essentially. I'm doing it in Texas, but I can go and scale this now across many different markets. If you want an introduction to my suppliers, I'm more than happy to give that to you. Come out and get a free book, and you can come out and check me out at 3:30. I'm doing a Q&A session. You can also check out my podcast, Investing in the US. You can hit me up at reedgoossens.com. And if you have any questions, please come out and meet me in the Aurora Ballroom at 3:30. And I want to thank you again so much for taking some time to learn a little bit about some of the ways in which I'm trying to reduce costs in order to maximize my investors' profits, and how global supply chain has really, really been impacting me and my business, but also what I'm doing to pivot and make it easier so I can get supplies here on time. So my name is Reed Goossens. Thank you so much. Questions will be at 3:30 in the Aurora Ballroom.